Hey everyone, Mike here. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to unpack the unique history of a one family owned and creatively modded Fender Musicmaster and Tweed Harvard amplifier. These two golden age Fenders were purchased together at Parlier's Music in Bakersfield, California in the late 1950s. And today we have with us Ken Bow, the son of the original owner and caretaker of these instruments since the early 1960s. Ken, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. It's a great joy to be here today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. We're so grateful that you brought your guitar and your amp to us here at the Guitar Bar. We're really excited to dig in.
Thank you.
So I understand that your dad bought both this guitar and amp at Parlier's Music on Baker Street in Bakersfield, California in the late 1950s.
That's correct. My parents married in the early part of 1958. And then actually they purchased it in 1959. It was the first year anniversary gift from my mom to my dad. She paid about $100 for it. She put it on layaway, and she would go once a month and pay $5, and I would go with her, and we would go in, and after a long time we finally got it out sometime in late 1959, I believe. And then he went back to Parlier with her, and of course they saw it, and he saw the amp, and like, I gotta have that too. And they have the little Parlier music emblems on them back from that era that matches their store logo, etc. So it's kind of a unique thing that you can't hardly find anywhere else.
That was something we were so excited about when we saw the logo on the amp and then the matching logo on the case.
Yes.
And then your bank paperwork that you saved with it for all these years. It's so rare that we get to package like this that has the story connected with it. So when your dad bought this guitar looked a bit different than what we have here today. Now this would have been a single pickup guitar with just the neck position coil, but I understand this was modded in Bakersfield in the day to have this second bridge pickup.
That is correct.
Yeah.
What I'm not sure of is when and where, because I was so young. I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
Sure.
And my dad's playing it around the house, and at some point it sprouted a new pickup, but I wasn't aware who. We had a lot of connections with the country music that era. The Blackboard was the hot spot because radio, KUZZ, broadcast from the Blackboard. My parents went there all the time. And it was there that they began to be exposed to this whole genre of music, and my dad really liked it. So he wanted to try to replicate that sound. And I think to do that, he had to have that extra pickup put in there. I'm not sure who did it. We were all very familiar with Semie Moseley, so there's an outside chance that Semie actually put that in there for my dad, because back then they were all just beginners. Nobody was really famous yet. They were just all Blackboard people and in and out. And so somewhere in that early 1959, 1960 date line, that second pickup was put in there.
Yeah, very, very early on. It seems like your dad was really chasing that sound, because he not only added this pickup in here, but he also changed the bridge saddles out. Now those would have originally been kind of what we call like a spiral saddle or a threaded saddle, but these are the same steel saddles that would have been on a late 50s Telecaster.
Yes.
So that twang and that brightness,
that's what he was after.
Part of that Bakersfield sound, absolutely.
Yeah.
A neck pickup's only going to get you so far with twang.
That's right. That's right.
And I love, this is just, it's almost like folk art. Such a nice aesthetic mod, because this wouldn't have had a rotary switch like this. This would have had just a little three-way toggle going on.
That's right.
But I love this rotary. It's aesthetically so pleasing, and function is great. Another really fun thing about this is that when these guitars typically get modded, they don't get modded with the parts of the era of the time.
Yes.
So the fact that this pickup is identical to this in its construction we almost never see that, and the work is really fine and really clean under here. Whomever did this really did know what they were doing, and if it was Semie Moseley, that just adds,
yes,
And
I think the reason that would be is it was done so early on. Otherwise, he didn't wait 10 years to mod it.
Sure.
Once he got it, he knew the sound that he wanted. But he said to me many times, the neck being a little smaller and shorter, my dad wasn't a big man. He didn't want a larger fretboard. So he enjoyed the smaller, faster fretboard. He wanted a Telecaster sound, but he didn't own a Telecaster, so that's what he was after.
I was really curious about that because it's not common for someone who is out gigging to be playing a Musicmaster. The Strats and the Tellys were the guitars of the day, and their scale was appreciably longer. It was a 25.5 inch instead of a 22.5. So I was wondering if that was something to taste for your dad, that he wanted something that was a little more compact, a little bit more fast.
Could have been, and it could have been just that this was the gift she gave him, so he didn't want to trade it back in. So rather than, he just went ahead and had it modded to the best he could.
Smart husband. Oh, I do love it, and the sound that these two make together is so exceptional. Now, your dad played this in some of the clubs in Bakersfield while that Bakersfield Sound was coalescing, and then you also played these as well in the early 60s after you inherited these from your dad?
That's correct. Back then, in the late 50s, early 60s, in the Bakersfield area, everyone has probably heard of the Blackboard, but there were other places too. There was one called the Lucky Spot. They were all talked about around the table at night. My parents were personal friends with Buck Owens and Merle Haggard both. They were really good to our family. Buck Owens is, you can see him on video even today. He's very effervescent. He's very acknowledging, inclusive, always smiling, has that bubbly personality. I've always said this is my own quote, it may be silly, but I've said Buck was the champagne and Merle was the bourbon. Merle was a completely different type person in person. Just got out of prison. As you know, he'd been in prison, got put in prison in 1958. He got out of prison around 1960, and that's when we would have known him. He was just getting started on that Blackboard scene. So there was that scene in the Blackboard, but there was also the Lucky Spot. But there's a place out of Bakersfield called the Edison Highway, and there's a number of bars and little gigs or venues, whatever the proper word would be. But my dad got hooked up in Tehachapi, which is about 50 miles east on Highway 58. So that's where the preponderance of this was played. That's where the bulk of this being played in a live venue was up there in Tehachapi. They would go to the Blackboard and be with that scene. I think my parents were there the night that George Jones comes. This is the kind of stuff that happens at the Blackboard. So George Jones walks in one night and he's a young guy singing and he's like, hey, that guy's pretty good, I'd like to meet him. And Merle and George tell the story. That's the night George Jones met Merle Haggard. So that's the environment that this is a piece of that little history as a set. Even though it wasn't played in the Blackboard to my knowledge, it did play some of the same songs because I heard them till 2 o'clock in the morning. My dad and they're practicing in the living room, playing them over and over and over. So those songs that were played in that era were played through this Hampton guitar in gigs in the early 60s.
And these were the stories that you would hear around the dinner table, your parents talking about Merle and Buck.
Yeah.
And they were, you said they're personal friends. Did they ever come over? Did you guys ever hang out at the house?
I was so young that my parents, all of their dealings with them were usually at the Blackboard or the Lucky Spot. So I would see them occasionally, but by the time I was in my early 20s, I left Bakersfield. So my exposure to them was primarily vicariously through my parents. They would go there and I was, of course, too young, so I had to stay home. So,
sure.
Yeah.
So Joe Maphis, Dim Lights, Thick Smoke, and Loud, Loud Music, purportedly written about the Blackboard.
Yes.
Does that square with your recollections of that place?
Again, I'm a kid, so I didn't go. I'm working through, good. But everything you hear is probably true and more. It was rowdy, it was raucous, it was loud. The Blackboard was known for fights in my day, and some were inside, most were outside. there was a wall you go out, and that's where you had your altercations, and you came back in. And so it was a rowdy place. It was known for that.
But had enough structure to it that we knew if we were going to have a fight, this is where we go when we have a fight, when we're at the Blackboard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, sometimes the manager would ask them to step out if it got too rowdy. Because they were at times broadcasting live on Cuz Radio. So the background noise is a part of it, you know.
Sure.
And it was an amazing place. How one little place garnered that attention and focus is really pretty amazing. Buck felt like it was almost destined to actually be on an equal deal with Nashville. He really felt that that was an up-and-coming venue. It never reached that, of course. But the men, their personalities, the air, it's hard to quantify all of that. The variance, the contrast of these two iconic men. And then the era. I mean, Buck and Merle, both from the same town, same time. You just don't hardly ever have that in any genre of music, much less country music. And then, of course, both of them being married to the same woman.
There you go.
All of this is such an iconic deal, it'll never be reproduced. I just can't ever see it happening again. So,
I completely agree with you. It is unique in the history of country music.
yes.
So back to Parlier's music, which I understand was only there for a few years, late 50s, maybe into the early 60s. Can you describe what it was like going into that shop?
Well, I hope this doesn't sound bad, but the word that pops in my mind is mom pop. You know,
Sure.
it wasn't a big fancy place. It was very cordial, friendly, homey, but that was Bakersfield. I mean, Bakersfield wasn't ever high class. We had a lot of class, but it was all lows. That's what we always said. But they had this, it was just a great place to go. They had time for you. They didn't have it, they'd try to get it. So they were sales-oriented people that people really liked a popular place.
So we're going to see Fenders on the wall mostly. Did they have Strats and Tellys? Did they have Mosrites in there at that point?
I would have been about 9 years old, so I didn't know there was any other guitar in the world except Fender till I was about 13 or 14, and that's when I met Semie Moseley. And I realized that there actually are other guitars being made in the world besides Fenders, because my dad was just a Fender guy. That's all he was. He didn't even believe in other other guitars.
Well, I mean, it's such an iconic piece of that place and that time. Fender being right there in Fullerton, California, it makes perfect sense that that DNA would be in Bakersfield, and that would be the instruments played there and sold there at Parlier's.
Yep. Mosrite made an indentation on that of course, he became, Semie's a unique character. I knew him actually more than I knew Buck Owens or Merle Haggard. Where I went to church at the time, Semie would bring a guitar in that he had just made, and he'd play at church, and of course sometimes it had the two necks and different things, and we were always interested in that. And then he opened a store out in Pumpkin Center, which is south of Bakersfield, and he was making them there, Semie was, and I worked across the street at a little grocery store, and I'd go over and talk to him at times because I knew him from church.
You got to actually step foot in his early workshop.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what was that space like? What was Semie's process like?
Well, and no disrespect to Semie, because we loved him dearly, and he's a brilliant guitar maker, obviously. But it was just, of course, to me, he's just a guy I'd see at church. I'm just a boy, you know. So he didn't hold the illustrious fame that I came to know later. But his guitar shop was just so funny. There'd be tools laying everywhere, sawdust on the floor, 3 or 4 open, and he'd be working on something. And because he knew me from church, I'd just stand there and watch. It would shoot the breeze, you know. He was just a really super friendly guy. Semie was more friendly one-on-one than he was in a group. If you met him in a group or like at church, he was kind of reticent. He didn't talk much. But one-on-one, just like a lot of old-timers, he'd just talk your ear off. So he'd talk about what he was doing, and I didn't understand any of it. I'm putting this in here because this will do this, and he would try to describe what he was doing, and I'm like, I couldn't get it. Well, I got to go back to work. My break's over, you know. Looking back, I wish I'd have paid more attention because of his ultimate climb to notoriety.
Sure. I mean, there's no other maker who's more associated with Bakersfield ultimately than Semie Moseley. And this would have had to be, say, 1963, 64, because things are still really small scale before the Ventures endorsement, before things really blow up in Bakersfield.
That's great. He was hand making them one at a time. Yeah,
man,
it was pretty cool.
Something that his daughter would eventually do in Bakersfield as well, and would continue that legacy.
Yeah. How did Bakersfield get all this started? We have no idea.
It's an embarrassment of riches. Yeah.
Alignment of the stars or something, yeah.
So how did you find us here at the Guitar Bar? I mean, it's not every day that guitars with these stories, with this kind of provenance, just walks in the front door.
Well, I'm going to confess to my own ignorance. Again, this is my dad's, and it was in the family, and so I treasured it, of course, because it was his. So I kept it, I played it a little, but mainly it was my dad. It was one of the things he gave me, his golf clubs and this. So I was at church one day, and my assistant, who is a big fan of your company, he loves Mike and Mike. And so he told me, he said, that's worth a little more than you think it is. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking $300 or $400, just an old tube amp, and didn't realize it would have any value to anyone. Everything on it's original. I've never changed anything. I never even replaced a tube in all the years that I owned it. And so with that, he said, you need to go talk to Mike and Mike's. So I came down, brought it down, and brought it to you guys. And your store is absolutely off the charts, helpful, friendly, bring you right in, make you feel inclusive. I can't describe the good vibes that I felt when I came in here, and the way that I was welcomed and fair, equitable. So you guys got it going on.
Well, thank you. That really does mean the world to us. That's what we're here to do. With this Harvard, so were you playing it recently in church, or was it just the guitar that was getting played and the amp was kind of hanging out?
More the amp.
Oh, really?
Than the guitar.
Okay.
I did play the guitar, but the amp was active until I brought it here. And you guys made it just look so much nicer. I looked at it and thought, man, I didn't know what I had here. This is a really nice thing. So I didn't have the true value of it. It was just a family heirloom, something like that.
I mean, it's a testament to Leo Fender's build quality.
Boy,
you played this for 60 years. And all that we had to do to make sure it was absolutely tip-top was change one capacitor and one tube.
That's amazing.
And it sounds like heaven. There are a few things that do it quite like a Fender Harvard does, and it's the amp that didn't make the transition from the Tweeds to the later brown and black panel amps that they did.
Right.
And so the Harvard kind of has that special notoriety. They only made this in the Tweed era. Steve Cropper used one of them, so there's that connection with it. But these two just sound lovely together.
It's a good setup, and got a great sound. Somebody's going to be a lucky person to get it. Yeah.
And you had this this body was refinished at some point. Tell me a little bit about how that process went.
When my dad played it, it was black, but I'm going to suppose that it was originally another color, because when it would chip, and he was rough on it in the bars, they'd get sauced up and whatever, and so I could see white undercarriage or a lighter color underneath. So I decided to have it refinished, and I did, and had it in this maroon color and the pickup guard as well. But originally, I think it was a pale white.
Yeah, exactly. So the desert sand would have been the go-to color, kind of a creamy off-white.
That's exactly right.
And it's so common to have these guitars refinished early on, because there were prominent players, that would have different custom color examples. And so to see, that guitar in black with a gold guard, great aesthetic look. They probably just painted right over the original finish, and then you saw it coming through.
They probably did, yeah.
Well, whomever did this refin for you did a really great job, and they used the right material. They used nitro lacquer. It's now checked, and it has that age to it.
Thank you.
I imagine this guard, just the way that the pick wear just goes right through that anodized gold aluminum. I assume that they painted it just to cover up any of that wear and just make it look new again.
This paint was done in the mid-'80s, probably in the 86 era, sometime in there, 1986, the repaint. So that's been on there for quite a while as well.
So actually, about 24 hours ago, somebody decided to buy this. And they were so emphatic that I tell you that this is going back to Bakersfield.
No way.
Yes.
What an incredible moment. What a journey.
Yes.
Wow.
They bought it because it was from Bakersfield, because your story was connected to it, and we told that story.
Incredible.
And now it's going home.
Wow. Wow.
So, full circle.
Full circle. That makes me happy. Yeah.
That
it
makes
belongs
me
in
happy
Bakersfield.
too.
It does.
Absolutely.
It really does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Any other stories or tidbits?
No, just a big thank you to you and your company for doing what just seems to be such a cool thing. You know, gathering these things from around the country and the world and making them available in one spot where we can come to walk up here and see your collection of Mosrites. I mean, that really did a number on me. Took me back to all the years talking to Semie and watching him. I mean, so, you know, kudos to you guys for filling this niche where you don't have to go 10 different places to see. You can come to a place where it's really, really great. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do try to bring that history here so you can experience it. And it really means so much to us that we get to tell these stories and we get to pass these along and make sure that that history stays with the instruments. Ken, thank you so much again for taking the time today.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you for watching today. For everything else we have at the Guitar Bar, please check out mmguitarbar.com and stay tuned for more content.